So in having this conversation, my hope is to get to know you a little bit more.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. So let's get to the writing then of the work. So you found your branch, the first one, and you just had this idea of putting on layers of text.
Well, the genesis of it is, it's just like kind of a fun idea that, well, there's this great quote that goes, cortical traces are inscriptions ever present in the mind, which is like a fun idea. So they're like a locational thing within your head, these groupings, these networks that are traces that help facilitate memory. And at the same time, language is the same kind of apparatus at work within the program of humanity and within culture. So the two both function to generate consciousness. And so they're parallels in a sense that I brought together in these forms, yeah, in a way.
So are the words that you're writing on here, are they any of your own memories, or I feel I read that you were doing, what is it called now, automatic writing. So it's just
the first ones were automatic,
yeah.
And then there was a kind of fun counterpoint to that, which was the impossibility of them being automatic because
of the process,
because of what I work with, which are these letter punches, just the alphabet, little dies that are struck with a small hammer, and that's the process.
Even and that's just a letter, not a full word.
One letter at a time, yeah. So as you're stringing that together in your mind, like cognitively, things are shifting and shifting, and you're trying
your brain works
to
so
hold
much
on to that.
faster
But
than
automatic writing is the same,
Yeah.
even if you flash through a page or try to just articulate something very quickly into your, let's say, voice recorder on your phone.
Yeah.
There's an interesting process there in each case.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I was interested in the genesis of an idea, how it becomes iterated as a written form, and which different processes might interfere with that, or what.
Yeah, so
that's
you were playing around with different processes with each of the different pieces then.
They all reference different kind of psychological tropes.
Okay.
Like If a Tree Falls, nostalgia is big for If a Tree Falls.
Okay.
And déjà vu is the main thing there within the story.
Yeah.
Over here are the automatics, and then the prints are called the Déjà Vu Printing Press series.
Because they came from...
Which come from this work here. We could talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
And then down there is the dream log, where I included other people's writing and kind of...
So based on like submissions,
I delved into this kind of... I felt like a little bit of a psychoanalyst.
So do you have logs of the words that you've written on the trees, or is it just kind of like for us to
I try not
discover
to.
It that way?
I think a lot of it is about an indirect glimpse kind of idea, in that the final iteration of an artist's idea can be exact, but is often very distant from the original, and maybe there's something we're always trying to hide anyway. And
that's okay, because somebody can take an interpretation of it in their own way to kind of suit themselves a little bit at the same time, right? It doesn't have to be your interpretation.
Sure, well, it becomes fun. It becomes like burrows. It becomes a cut-up when people just go in and take the text and they only get the fragmented versions, and that becomes something new.
Yeah.
So each interaction with the work is fresh and is new. I'm really interested in print culture, historically, and I like the McLuhan idea of cold and hot media. I find that very interesting.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Cold.
Just a little for me, please. Please. And maybe for anybody else who needs explanation.
It's like a 60s idea, pretty famous Canadian theorist, professor at U of T.
I know Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I mean...
Media is the message, of course, is like the famous thing. But hot and cold media are about how we view things and how they affect us, whether it's more like audio, tactile, or more visual.
Okay.
And the argument was like something along the lines of, let's see if I get this right. TV is cold.
Okay.
And radio is hot.
Okay.
Although, Lord, that might be the opposite way.
I will Google it.
But to me, I'm more interested in the idea of the different senses and how we're exposed to media.
Okay.
Essentially, is what I'm getting at. The hot and cold thing, that's a toughie, but that's essentially the gist of it anyway.
Yeah.
The important part is how print affects us. For me, it's been very negative. In the city, I've been very overwhelmed by the inundation of things.
Yeah.
The semiosis taking place in the mind as you stroll along and 50 different signs hit you at once, and consciously or unconsciously, you're getting all mixed up. And
well, because it's an unconscious thing, you're taking it in and you don't even realize.
Well,
half the time.
we're just blasted at this point in history.
Absolutely.
Someone read like the front page of a newspaper in the 1860s, and that was like the most print they encountered. Yeah.
So history and nostalgia also play a big role in the way that you're doing things, because I mean, you could have had these etched on or whatever. There's something about older ways of doing things that you like. Is that?
Well, it's like a weird alternative printing press at this point. It's not literally a press, but yeah, you could argue it.
Yeah.
So it's an alternative printing technology / sculpture. Yeah, and it wasn't my intention, but I was working on a scaffold outdoors, and the piece was doused in rain many times over.
Yeah.
I tried to protect it.
Yeah.
And, you know, frustration, I would just look up at there, and I'd be like, oh no, the letters are disappearing. And I would have done like 2 months at this point and be looking up, and I'd be like,
that's
oh
heartbreaking.
no. And, but then I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep going.
So that's the thing. It's like finding solutions.
They seem to be sticking around slightly, and then, yeah, they never left. They're still there.
Yeah.
Just they rose to the surface just enough to allow me to do this cool printing technique, which came later, which was kind of accidental. Yeah. So, yeah, it's all about experimentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the process, and kind of being okay with where you are in the process.
Absolutely.
When I make my artwork, I know that I need to have like a framework to work within. Otherwise, I feel crippled by potential and limitless ability.
This
and
is taking me somewhere very good.
I can't do it. I just can't. So I'm wondering if having a framework or like rules that you kind of create on your own, because as artists you can do anything. That's what I keep hearing is like, oh, there's no rules, just do whatever you want. Okay, but like, do you create rules for yourself in order to be able to accomplish tasks and
This takes me to a very interesting place.
Let's go there.
And a very, like, a place I really like.
Okay, great.
Which is literary constraint.
Okay.
And literary constraint is interesting. There's a movement in France called the Oulipo movement, which I think was in the late 70s and 80s. And there's a very famous author, I can't remember his name, but he wrote, and maybe some of you have heard of it, a novel restricting himself from using the letter E, I think it was. And he wrote a full novel without the letter E. And so for me, my constraint is the media itself, maybe.
Okay.
So that's my letter E, is that I can't go off the branch. You know, I have to stay on the branch. It's this memory thing for me, just personally.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's especially stream of conscious and dreamlike to look at this weird tree photocopy.
Yeah.
And like be like, oh yeah, oh within that, oh yeah, that moment, right? What happened before that? What happened after that? How did that go? Because I wrote that 2 years ago in the rain, you know, on a scaffold. And
it's a nice way of recollecting, then.
Yeah, it's very cool for me. But I hope people can appreciate it on another level, just because I think even randomly the language I use is very like has a certain poetry. Yeah. Yeah, and so I feel like even fragmented, like the burrows, like the cut-up technique, like even earlier with data and cutting up newspapers and all that fun stuff, there's that element of surprise, and you don't know what can happen next, and the morphology of the language is ever-changing, I guess, and that's a curious and interesting thing. One of my projects next, I think I'll be doing with this piece, in this cheating kind of way.
I wouldn't say cheating, but you can use whatever word you like.
Straying, breaking the rules.
Yeah.
Is to produce a book using only the words on here. So I produce like a small short story or a novel using frottage, but just selecting word for word.
Yeah,
from
okay,
it.
That's what I was going to say. Is it
so
going
it
to
would
be
become
like
an original piece.
Love it.
Using this as a printing press with only the limited, you know, selection of what's there. Yeah.
And it would be a different story, do you think?
It's going to be a real pain in the ass, but
He's ready for the challenge.
But I've said it now.
Yeah, it's happening. Caught on tape. So is that the purpose then at the end of the day to create this art, is to process something through you to kind of relay it? Or is it just an idea of like creating something and just being kind of ingenious about what you're making? Or is it to end up with something of beauty at the end of the day? What's the purpose of it for you?
It all stems from that ontology. It stems from existence. It stems from philosophy. I'm obsessively an art maker but I'm also someone who's experienced periods of extreme disorientation via language and manic periods. And so I feel like that's at the root of it, is trying to grab onto the real.
Okay.
Trying to have something real to keep my feet on the ground. And I feel like this body of work is that for me.
And I love that it's on a solid tree that's like, you know, you can't. So it's an idea of like permanence a little bit. Something permanent.
I guess, I mean, in the way lots of people strive for permanence in art, but, but I don't know if it's permanent so much as just, constant exploration. Murray Gelman, one of my favorite physicists of all time, discovered the quark, the smallest particle we know. So he's a very famous dude. He also founded the Santa Fe Institute in California, which deals with language, and they have a whole database they've put online at this point of ancient languages that they've been carefully putting together so you can access them. It's very weird and technical and specific. If you look, it's very strange, but it's a beautiful, interesting idea as a project. Man, have I gone on a digression here?
Alternative
really
languages.
branched off there.
Really really branched off. But he has this great quote about physics, and just because you're talking about dimensionality and music, and we're talking about different, I just enjoy it because he talks about quantum physics, and he says it's like a branching after branching after branching. At each branching, there's an event, and then it is determined which way it goes from there, onward, and so forth. It's a tree. And that's the way he describes investigating quantum particles, essentially.
Music from the top down.
So I like the idea of fallen branches because to link it back, in the winter you can see this sort of, well, you see the reticulate vascular nature of leaves falling, and then you see the form itself repeating in a fractal, if you like, throughout all the branches once they're bare. And the same form is, within your head. And then at the cosmic realm, when you look at clusters of galaxies, they form these nebulous webs that are very similar. So it blows my mind.
So it's like small.
And if you really look at that, so these works were about like trying to tackle that in a kind of paradoxical art sculpture, an object that could represent the overwhelming nature of consciousness and dealing with language and interpreting the real, and at the same time giving homage to those forms that permeate the real and are so present.
I mean, I think it's nice to have that balance where you can kind of just let loose and just like get it out there. Is it stuff that you're processing through yourself, or are you trying to like evoke a memory? Because I know you mentioned that you're working through memory, or you're touching on memory a little bit.
These cortical traces.
So are you trying to remember a memory, or are you trying to design a memory, or is it just whatever comes kind of?
I think it's coming back to this just, okay, what's a fun way to look at it? Writing is like a path.
Yeah.
Right? We circumambulate this path.
Yeah.
And the signifiers, jump out at us. And I find that fascinating. In a cognitive way, you're reading a story. Actually, a lot of your brain thinks you're running, even though it's just the protagonist who's running. Your brain is literally enacting running, and it's the same. If I was running in the park, these areas of my brain would be doing the same exact thing.
As if you're,
and so visualization, in other words, is what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
What images are jumping at people as they're going into the writing in this context, as they're circling, as they're circumambulating?
Yeah, to read it.
What is that about? So what am I triggering for them is interesting, and I think that interaction is very cool. I don't know.
So you had mentioned when we talked about accessibility and your interest in that kind of that in terms of your art and having people, I guess, interact with your art. And so do you ever get that kind of feedback from anybody who has witnessed your art, or do you feel like satisfied in that? Because that's what you desire, to have that kind of accessibility and have somebody have an experience. Do you ever get to like feel the benefit of that experience?
There's a bunch of examples.
Yeah?
But my favorite is Little Ones.
I need to bring my kids into this space.
Yeah. A certain someone's nephew was circling one of my pieces, singing their ABCs, and I really liked that. And then in other, I've just seen it hundreds of times now, where someone's standing in front of it, going, "Oh, that's a branch," and then there's like a flash, and they're like, "Whoa!
Yeah.
What did you do?" And I like that. I enjoy
Well,
that.
it's very unexpected.
Yeah.
It is very unexpected to have.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite moments. It's
Yeah.
like this flip. Suddenly they see it and they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, so you're
But
not done writing on trees.
I
which
guess
is
something
exciting for
we
me.
haven't brought up, which might be important,
Yeah.
maybe.
If you think it is, then please let's talk about it. This is I'm not your only chance. This is a chance.
Yeah.
It's Interspace. And the fact that when you read something on a page or on my work, you're not hearing noises. There's no cacophony. But it can be perceived that way if you're not careful. And I think that's an interesting thing that people don't think about. Well, all this visual noise and clutter is hitting you from literature. Maybe you're enjoying it, maybe you're not, but it's silent. And you can breathe during that, and you can take that information in. And if you greet information from that place, I think you might just survive in this world.
In this like overabundant world.
Yeah, in this inundating world. Yeah.